Welcome everyone to tonight's Common Council meeting being called to order. Everyone is checked in except Mr. Hindler is absent. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, public comment. At this time, the mayor will recognize members of the public who have indicated their desire to address the council upon recognition by the mayor. Persons may address the council from the podium first stating their name and address. Council may take action on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Anyone from the public wish to address the council? Please just state your name and address for the record.
Okay, hello, my name is Megan Pickler. I live at 100 North Hume Avenue in Marshfield.
I'm Emily Leacher. I live at 2536 Draper Road in Dorchester.
And we're both health educators from the Marshfield Clinic Health System, and we are here today to address tobacco-free parks in Marshfield. And we have kind of a cheesy skit for you guys, but we wanted to make sure to address every frequently asked question to make sure that you guys have enough information to make an informed decision. So we're gonna start. Emily, is it legal to create tobacco-free parks?
Actually, yes. Local governments have the legal right to adopt laws to protect residents' health and safety. This authority actually enables communities to adopt smoke-free laws to reduce exposure to harmful secondhand tobacco smoke. But Megan, even though it's legal, can we actually create tobacco-free ordinances, and is it really a need?
Yes, tobacco-free parks protect the environment and the health and safety of people using recreational areas, especially the kids. These ordinances are similar to those prohibiting alcohol and litter or requiring that pets be on leashes in parks.
In fact, 17 Wisconsin communities have already passed tobacco-free park ordinances. But Megan, can you tell me a little bit more about the parks and protecting kids?
Sure. So secondhand smoke is a known human carcinogen, and there is no safe level of exposure. Secondhand smoke levels in outdoor public areas can actually reach levels as high as those found in indoor facilities where smoking is permitted. Secondhand smoke odor is detectable at 23 feet from the source, and irritation levels begin 13 feet from the source. Tobacco-free ordinances ensure kids and families don't have to worry about being exposed to this deadly toxin in the spaces they play. It also helps prevent youth tobacco use by having adults be tobacco-free role models for those throughout the community. So, what are the benefits of a tobacco-free park?
Most community sporting events are held at either city or school athletic facilities, and most school districts already prohibit tobacco use on their grounds, including Columbus and Marshfield. Ordinances provide consistency among athletic fields and groups and help prevent any type of confusion. But Megan, do tobacco-free ordinances keep tobacco users from using the recreation areas?
That's a good question. But actually, people go to recreational areas to exercise or relax, not to necessarily use tobacco. Tobacco users work, shop, travel, and reside in tobacco-free places every day. Perhaps more importantly, it's important to note that 86% of Wisconsin adults don't actually even smoke cigarettes, and the vast majority of non-smokers want to enjoy the recreational areas in the parks. So, let's say we pass this ordinance. How do we enforce it?
Actually, tobacco-free parks are relatively easy to enforce because these laws, for the most part, are self-enforcing, meaning that people police themselves and cooperate with the law. This is similar to laws enforcing pet owners to pick up their pet's feces. Megan, thank you so much for answering all of my questions today. I think I finally have all the information I need to make an informed decision. Okay. Any questions from you guys?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public wish to address the council?
My name is Jean Swenson, 1111 East 21st Street. I've already talked to or left messages for all of the alderpersons and the mayor. With police officers attending each council meeting already, or the option to hire an officer to be on guard, I cannot see the reasoning behind people bringing their own guns into the council chambers. I'd be interested to find out from the council members who would like to bring their guns, to find out if they participate in regular active shooter drills with their guns. It's one thing to practice shooting at a gun range, and it's an entirely different thing to be confronted by a dangerous individual in close quarters like the council chambers. There have been sad situations where innocent bystanders have been shot, even killed by trained officers. How much more of a possibility would there be for that to happen with ordinary citizens firing under duress? I urge you to keep the sign saying, "No guns allowed." Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to address the council? Final call, anyone else? All right, seeing no one, we'll move on to item D, approval of the minutes from October 21st council meeting, October 21st council budget meeting, and October 29th council budget meeting. There is a motion to approve by Mr. Peschel, second by Mr. Fire. Mr. Fisher, you want to amend? Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Thank you. That motion carries 9-0. E, staff updates, introduction of the new employee, Cole Raber by Dan Connect, the Director of Public Works.
Thank you. Cole and I are going to do a little skit for you right now. You ready?
I'm ready to do it, yeah.
All right. Thank you. As you know, Mary Anderson is retiring later this month after 39 years as our Public Works Administrative Assistant, and Cole has been hired to take her spot. We're happy to have him on board. Cole is a graduate of Marshfield High School. He's also a graduate of UW Oshkosh in a degree in criminal justice, where he participated in the ROTC program. From there, he spent over 4 years in the Army in several roles, but what we liked about his experience, he was an assistant operations manager and executive assistant and HR officer in support of providing direct administrative support to the battalion commander. He was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, and was involved in a battalion of over 700 soldiers, where he provided that administrative support. And we're honored to have Cole here on our team, and pleased to be part of his civilian career. We see great opportunities, not only for the city and our public works department, but for Cole to advance his career here with the city. Please help me welcome Raber.
Let's see. All right. Item D, mayor updates. First of all, we have some guests here from Boy Scouts Troop 391. They're here doing it. So please, it's going to be a fun meeting, fellas. You're going to enjoy it. Two other things on the 20th. This is for the council members. On the 20th at the community center, there will be the employee recognition event that takes place there in the evening. I think it starts around 5:30. Right now, there are 80 folks there, but that's our time to show appreciation for city staff. So I hope you can make it. If you can, please call Amy tomorrow or soon so she can get your reservation. And then on the 25th, or I'm sorry, on the 21st, the night after the employee recognition, the parade down Central Avenue will be on, and it will be televised live on Facebook. As well as once we get done with that, they'll put it on channel 989 and 990 for folks to see. But it will be live on Facebook this year, so it's very exciting. That's it for me. Item G, council comments. Any council comments? Mr. Bargender.
Thank you, Mayor. Yesterday, I attended the Veterans Day ceremony at the Stony Creek Living Community, honoring World War II veterans John Josewak and Merlin Bauer. It was my great honor to personally thank them for their wartime military service to our great country. To further honor them for their sacrifice, today I made a monetary donation in their names to the Marshfield Military History Museum. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council comments? Mr. Budke.
Mike, would you announce the Veteran of the Year, please?
Saturday night, we had our military banquet at American Legion Post 54, and one of our former aldermen from the fifth, sixth, seventh, from the 7th District. Gary Cummings was picked as the Veteran of the Year. And John Spiros was there, and John gave a nice plaque and said that he never could convince Gary to vote yes, and he said that I would vote yes for $100. It was a great night.
Thank you. Any other council comments? All right, item H, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Any reports from commissions, boards, and committees? Item I, is there a motion to receive and place on file approving all recommended actions in the consent agenda? Motion by Mr. Butke, second by Mr. Fire. Discussion, Mr. Witzel.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to remove the item G, number 2, specific resolution 2019-45, the vacating of the sanitary sewer easement, please.
Okay, any other deletions from the consent agenda? Seeing no other deletions in, please vote. That motion carries 9-0. And then we will item J is we will discuss resolution number 2019-45, vacating sanitary sewer easement. Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. In watching the video of the Board of Public Works meeting, this was not brought up at all, so I thought I probably should. There's 3 parcels of land. I believe it's right across the street from Washington Elementary.
Yes.
School. And it's owned by one individual who I would assume is planning to develop those 3 parcels. And in the information that was provided, it was made very clear that vacating that easement leaves the property owner responsible for anything that may happen to the existing tunnel, concrete, whatever that's through there right now, providing that easement.
Basically that there's a 15-inch concrete sanitary sewer that runs through there. It's been capped off at both ends. They wanted the easement removed so they could possibly move buildings closer. That sanitary sewer is 14 to 20 feet deep. And yes, we basically were releasing the easement, but we are not removing that sanitary sewer. So if they were going to put a building, most likely, if they were going to plan to put a building on top of it, it would be recommended that they remove it. But they probably don't have to.
Okay, the concern I have is whether or not future owners of that property, because I'm assuming 3 properties side by side are not going to be owned by the same person who currently owns. My concern would be future owners of that property, if they would be informed of what's there, so that if there is something that deteriorates down the road, that they're not surprised by that and whatever expense may be involved with rectifying that issue.
It's going to get recorded. And of the release of that easement, the financial end of that, if we do something stating that in the
right now, by abandoning that easement, it puts any rectifying of that easement, for example, it collapses. Anything that happens with that easement, with that pipe that's there that's been capped, is now the responsibility of the owner. And I guess my concern is that properties are developed, the houses are sold, that information is not provided suddenly 50 years down the road, whatever it might happen, there's a sudden caving in or something else that occurs without those people having any concept of what happened. So I didn't know if there was any clause that had to be identified in the sale of the properties that exists and that they would be responsible for taking care of that once it's...
I guess anyone that would purchase a property would know that there's a CSM that does show that easement on there. And this would be a document vacating that for future use.
Okay. So they would be informed.
Because there are other easements on those parcels too.
Okay. So they would be informed then of the potential of having to do something with that.
I would think if they get a copy of the map before they purchase, some people don't look at those types of details either.
Okay. Thank you.
So is there a motion to approve resolution 2019-45, vacating sanitary sewer easement? Motion by Mr. Butke, second by Mr. Fire. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0. Item K, second reading of ordinance number 1402, Hume Avenue right-of-way annexation, presented by Dan Connect, Director of Public Works.
Thank you. As you recall, this ordinance would annex right away on the north side of McMillan Street for the east half of Hume Avenue. This is a project that we constructed in 2018. That east half of the right-of-way remains in the town of McMillan until we annex it. This has been recommended by the Board of Public Works, and I'd recommend your approval this evening.
Thank you, Dan. There is a motion to approve by Mr. Witzel, second by Mr. Fire. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. Motion carries 9-0.
Thank you.
Item L, second reading of ordinance number 1420, request by the Unified School District of Marshfield to rezone the properties located at 900 East 4th Street, parcels 33-00186 and 33-00189 from SR4 Single Family Residential to CD Campus Development Zoning District, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a second reading. Essentially, the school district is trying to rezone two parcels from single-family residential to campus development. The plan is to establish a campus district for this middle school, and then they will be able to submit a campus master plan in upcoming months. The rezoning request conforms with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. And only two zoning districts surround the subject properties, SR4 to the west and SR6, which are both single-family residential, to the north and northwest. The Plan Commission did recommend this, and with that, I would recommend to approve ordinance number 1420.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 1420? A motion by Mr. Fire, a second by Mr. Bargender. Discussion, please, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. So they will be coming forth with a campus master plan?
Yes, as of right now, we're thinking it's going to be in January.
I thought they weren't going to be doing that because the improvements weren't going to be exceeding a certain dollar amount.
They decided to go ahead and do a campus master plan for that site, but they don't really have anything other than maybe a shed plan for exterior work on the site, except for they did go through that public informational meeting about kind of resurfacing the track and resodding the field and grading issues. But this would focus on kind of the buildings that they plan on doing over the next 5 years, which sounds like it'll be minimal, but I guess I haven't quite seen a rough draft for it. And I talked with Ron Stromsky today, and it sounds like January is when they would bring forward to at least the Plan Commission.
What about the parking issues in the area?
Well, those parking would be addressed in the campus master plan. As for the parking issues, it seems to have been improved after the football stadium has gone away, but I don't really go after hours.
Unfortunately, that was our assumption, but it was noted numerous times that the property that's for sale right now, right across the street, was parked up solid.
Okay.
A lot of times during events that took place, even though there wasn't varsity football.
Okay. And yeah, that's one of the things that they can address in the Plan Commission, and Common Council can address and see if they can come up with some solutions. They did also mention maybe doing some grass parking as a possibility. Now, that's one thing that we can discuss at a later meeting.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. And motion carries 9-0. Item M, second reading of ordinance number 1421, request by United Way to rezone the property located at 612 West Blodgett Street, parcel 33-00706 from SR6 Single Family Residential to UMU Urban Mixed Use District, presented by Bryce Hembrook, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. The applicant is proposing to rezone the property from SR6, which is once again a single family residential zoning district, to UMU Urban Mixed Use. This would allow for a variety of different land uses that they could use there, but they're intending to use it for office space for their new United Way office. This rezoning request conforms with the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. The property will meet all lot size, width, and setback requirements for the UMU zoning district. The one thing to note is that there would be a parking requirement that's an increase to 6 parking stalls. So by the time that they use the office as an official land use, they would either have to get a parking exception through a conditional use permit, or they would have to provide those 6 parking spaces by the time that they would use that office. So with that, Plan Commission recommended approval, and this is the second reading. That's the recommendation. recommendation is to approve ordinance number 1421.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 1421? A motion by Mr. Jockick, second by Mr. Fisher. Discussion, please, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. In reading through the information in the packet, it appears as though they're going to be putting a parking lot, what would be to the, I guess, south of that building. And that parking lot may include some outdoor lighting.
Yeah, so we haven't quite seen a true parking plan for this yet. We were assuming that it could go to the south because it would be away from in front of the front facade. So that was kind of where they were thinking of. And there could be additional lighting. So there is exterior lighting that's required. I believe it's if there's 10 parking spaces is when that requirement kicks in. So that would have to conform. We do have exterior lighting standards in our code. So any change in that would have to conform to our code. As for the parking, we don't have a exact parking plan yet, but that would just have to be approved by the time that they were able to use the building.
Okay, and would that lighting then cause a problem with the neighbor? I believe it's a resident that's to the east.
Well, so the intention of our code is to try to prevent issues between neighbors for exterior lighting. So without seeing the plans, I can't really say for sure, but the code is written to try to make sure that there is a cutoff at the property line and certain foot candles can't, be certain distance away from the property line and whatnot. So the code is intended to make sure that there's not an issue. But without seeing a plan, I can't really answer that.
And there is a property to the south that's also urban mixed use, is that correct, with a large parking lot?
Correct.
So it's to be assumed that any lighting that they may do would probably be dwarfed in comparison to the lighting I'm assuming is in another parking lot.
It could be, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
Ashley Winch is here, the director of the United Way. Ashley, if you could come up and I know you thanked the family for donating that, but if you could come up and just let the people know who donated that property to you.
So this spring, Heidi Heckel walked into our office wanting to donate her mother's property. Her mother had passed, I want to say, late March, and it was her wish to have their home continue as the Heckel House and providing, giving back to our community. So
Awesome.
it was a wonderful gift.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0. Item N, a second reading of ordinance number 1422, prohibiting smoking in any city park, presented by Justin Casperson, Director of Parks and Rec.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening. This is the second reading of ordinance number 1422. This is amending the current ordinance, section 11-11, subsection B, public nuisance smoking. This ultimately would prohibit the use of smoking or smoking products in city parks. This is the second reading. This was brought up at an earlier meeting. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or talk about it, but Attorney Wolfgram provided the ordinance number 14.2 and the references in his memo.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 1422? A motion by Mr. Butke, second by Mr. McSwain. Mrs. Spiros.
I believe I said this in the last meeting. I'm a nurse. I'm a registered nurse. I hate smoking. I don't do it myself as far as that goes. But I think this is a big overreach of government, so I will not be supporting that for that purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel?
Thank you. Is there a reason why, let me step back a second. Is this just tobacco-based products?
No, it would include our smoking ban, which includes e-cigarettes, so for the general term.
Okay, because I didn't see that. I didn't think specified.
In this information, it's amending our current ordinance, which obviously has the specifics on all of the tobacco products or ventilation products or e-cigarettes, those types of products. That's all in our ordinance. So this is just amending it to include parks. It's not changing the ordinance other than adding parks.
Thank you.
Mr. Fire.
Having not spoken for the last 30 years, I can understand the smoking issue. I'm glad I quit. But I think I have to agree with Mrs. Spiros that it is overreaching, and I think it also has an effect on the fair property. And I am going to vote no against this. I mean, I'm not against all for smoking. I gave up smoking. I was one of the lucky ones. But I think it's something that it's an open air product. All over there's a lot of air there, 20 feet, 23 feet. What about the diesel trucks that come running through the parking lot and start putting off smoke? That's a lot of smoke too. There's a lot of that in the park too. So I'm just going to vote no on it.
Thank you. Mr. Bargender.
I'm not a smoker, but the problem I have here is enforcement. Is there going to be a police officer patrolling the parks in the summertime, making sure that people aren't smoking in public? I don't mind putting it on the books, but if it's unenforceable, I just don't see the reason to put it on the books. If the chief would like to comment on this, how his officers would enforce this ordinance if we enact it. Chief?
I guess the answer is it depends on if it would be approved to add staffing to the police department, which I could then come forward with and ask for additional staffing. But no, we wouldn't have individuals down there. Our officers do routinely patrol the parks. So if they would see something, they would act accordingly. It would also be on a complaint basis. If there was a complaint, we could respond to that complaint. But there would not be anybody stationed down there routinely.
Mr. Butke.
Maybe girls, you got to give that skit again.
I would like to reiterate that.
If I could, Mayor, could.
Sure.
I just want to address the enforcement again. So this is similar to pets on leashes in parks, picking up pets' feces, alcohol in parks. It's mainly self-enforcing. And there are some things that the city can do to make that more evident, such as signs and things like that. But it's more so to address the complaints that Justin is already getting. So again, it would be self-enforcing for the most part, unless a complaint were to come into the office.
The other thing about that is I've seen it firsthand over the years, and it's not even just the smoking. I've been down by the playground with grandkids, and there's cigarette butts all over at that time. So they didn't know that, if you have a sign there that they can't do it right there, at least shouldn't have the cigarette butts in the sand by where the kids are playing. So I'm not a smoker either, but I think we should protect the kids, and I think we should try to keep our parks looking as nice as what they do.
Mr. McSwain.
We have a greater debt to the people that we're trying to protect rather than a debt to the people that we want to give free rein to whatever they want to do. We're protecting the bulk of the public. It's not prohibiting people from smoking. They can do it someplace else. It's not taking away their freedom. And again, it was stated in the skit. It's done in schools and all these other places where people engage in activities. It's a reasonable limitation on the people who smoke.
I would just like to weigh in here. First of all, I'm not a smoker. I think that was important to say. My fear is government overreach. If we're talking about a legal product, because if we're really concerned about the smoke at the same time that we have barbecue pits at our parks that emit smoke, And so then do we go overreach that? It's just, I mean, ultimately you're going to make the decision, but it's like, how far do we go? And you bring up a good point, Mr. McSwain. Yes, we do have to do that, but if it's smoke, then we have to look at the barbecue pits that we actually provide out there. I don't know. This is a tough one. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. First of all, I find it interesting because when I think about the smoking ban of the park, I don't think of the fairgrounds and the vastness of that. I think of the Wenzel Family Plaza and the smallness of that. And I think of a confined area with family-friendly amenities and a concert going on and little kids running around with the smoking going on. And I'm all for rights. I think one of the important things is that people have rights, but I think it also has to be understood that people have rights to do a lot of things as long as it doesn't infringe on other people's rights for other things. And I think the right for a family to bring young kids to the Wenzel Family Plaza and let them play in the splash pad or hang out during a concert, I think that's pretty important. And if the only way that we can ensure that that right is protected is to perhaps stifle to some degree the rights of others, I think we need to look at that. And, you know, we're looking at protecting innocent people. And I don't necessarily care for the comparison of that to the barbecue pit because I don't think they really fit in the same category. But of course I grill out a lot, so maybe I'm gonna end up with some health issues from that, I don't know. But I think we need to consider what are we trying to accomplish with this? And I think if we're trying to provide family-friendly opportunities, which I think is what the Wenzel Family Plaza is about and what the zoo and Wildwood Park and the playground and eventually our aquatic center and all of these things where it's supposed to be family friendly. It's bring your kids, bring your grandkids, come down, enjoy a time as a family. I think that's what we really need to be looking at here more than whether somebody has to step off to the sidewalk to burn one.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you. Since everyone is saying they don't smoke, I guess I smoke on a rare occasion. I like a good cigar every so often, but that's just me. I guess where I'm coming from right now is I believe in individual rights, and I too believe this would be a little, so I just cannot support at this time.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you. In addition to my feeling of government overreach, I want to remind everybody sitting here that we just had a chief stand up and say this isn't enforceable. He can't enforce it. Why would you create something that your own police department can't enforce? It doesn't make any sense to me. And obviously, we've all gone over the budget. We know that there's no room to hire extra officers to patrol the parks. Wenzel Plaza is not the only park in this city. It may be the smallest, but most of them are much larger and have a lot more space. So again, I think that we have to support individual rights, and this is an overreach.
Thank you. Mr. Jockett.
What about the rights of 86% of the population that don't smoke? It's much easier, I would think, if you're a smoker, to go get your fix someplace else than to have a family who's already there, already sitting down, all of a sudden having someone sit down smoking a cigarette next to them, being bothered by that, for them to move. Why should someone who isn't smoking have to move if their enjoyment is being taken away? And as far as the enforcement, it's just self-enforcing. We put up a sign, most people are going to obey that. I don't think the enforcement's not an issue for me. There are 17 other communities that somehow have figured out how to do this. And basically it's probably putting up a sign and understanding that people intelligence will say, okay, I just don't have to smoke here. If they want to go back to their car, go back to the parking lot, whatever, they can get their fix. But 86% of the population don't smoke. What about their rights to have clean air and being able to enjoy the events that we're sponsoring in the park?
Thank you. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. Regarding the enforcement issue, and I don't think the chief needs to necessarily get up for this one, but I believe that we have far more buildings that are no smoking, and I don't believe that we have any officers that are patrolling those buildings regularly, handing out tickets for no smoking. I think that that enforcement happens within the confines of that location by those that are around. And I think that this situation will be very similar to that. People that are around will be able to identify that there is the ordinance and will be able to encourage anybody who tries to smoke to take it elsewhere.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what was said here. Number one, the chief didn't say it's not enforceable. It's enforced by complaint. So, and we have many, many ordinances in the city that are based on complaints. We can't have staff to do all this stuff. So if somebody complains about it, it's chronic, the word will get around that you don't do it. And why don't we allow people smoking in schools then? Because people have the rights to smoke. Mr. McSwain, you mentioned that we are here to protect the children here that are going to these playgrounds. And to me, it's a no-brainer. And I too don't like government overreaching, but I don't think this one is. If it is, it's because there's certain people that got to smoke right by children, and they're thinking about themselves instead of walking away and smoking somewhere else.
Thank you, Mr. McSwain.
Yeah, I was just going to point out what Mr. Butke pointed out about the enforcement, that there's all kinds of laws that somebody's not running around trying to enforce them, but when there's problems, you try to solve it, you eventually enforce it. So this would not be different from many other of our ordinances.
Thank you. Nick.
Justin, we already have a policy that forbids smoking within the parks, don't we?
We have a policy that does prohibit it, but it's not enforceable. You would have to ask the person, and they're not obligated. It's not an ordinance. The police can't get involved, nor can you require them other than public shaming.
And are there signs telling people that they can't smoke?
Yes, we have signs like by the pool, athletic facilities, zoo, kind of spectator areas. There are signs.
Okay, so we already have signs saying that smoking isn't allowed in the park. And now we're going to pass an ordinance to say smoking isn't allowed in the park. We're going to rely on signs to somehow enforce people not to smoke in the park because there's a sign that says they won't smoke in the park. It seems to me we're being kind of redundant, other than now we will be able to somehow have the police punish these people for smoking in the park. To me, it's redundant.
Mrs. Spiros.
Yeah, I agree with what Nick said. And also, I can just see those calls coming into the police department. I want to know what kind of priority that call gets. Hey, we got a smoker out here at Brain Park. Can you send the police? I mean, that's totally ridiculous. That is a totally ridiculous concept to me. I'm pretty sure they have more important things to do than chase a smoker that will probably already be gone from the park by the time they get there.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
So why do we have laws for people not speeding then? Why don't we just put signs up, please don't speed? How's that going to go? If they know that there's a possibility of getting a fine, there's some consequences there. So that is more enforceable. Nick, you should know that. You were an officer.
Thank you. Mr. Bargender.
Just one last thing on the enforcement thing. If we do put signs out, would we put the ordinance number and the fine on the sign if they would get caught doing it? I mean, then it would be more self-enforcement. The sign would be more meaningful, and probably less people would make that call to the PD requesting police to come and fine people for smoking.
All of the ordinances that we have posted for the parks do have the ordinance number. They necessarily don't have the fines because they do change.
But you do, Justin, already have signs up that say no smoking.
Right, but it's not an ordinance. It's just a department policy. It's not really forcible other than asking people not to do it. But they can they can do it if they want.
Okay. Any further discussion? Steve?
Just one quick thing. We oftentimes look for input from people, and I just want to thank Emily and Megan and Jenna Flynn, who was here a couple of meetings ago, for their input and taking the time to give us some information. That's always good to see.
Mr. Jokic.
So who are the other communities that have this? Do you have a list available? You want to take the microphone, please?
Off the top of my head, the three that I made sure to memorize was Appleton, Milwaukee, and Madison. Milwaukee, to me, stood out as a huge city being able to enforce this and finding it to be extremely important to pass this ordinance, I think speaks volumes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, seeing no further discussion, please vote. That motion carries 5-4. Or no, I'm sorry, what's that?
I guess it didn't get.
It failed. Okay, so it fails for lack of of 6 votes. Item O, second reading of ordinance number 1423, amending chapter 25 of the Marshfield Municipal Code, presented by Tom Turchi.
All right, in chapter 25 of the municipal code talks about construction site erosion control. The major change to this ordinance was to add Article 3, which is illicit discharge detection and elimination requirements. The Department of Natural Resources did an audit of our stormwater program here a year ago, October, and we were lacking in this part of it and asked us to be compliant with our MS4 permit by adding an illicit discharge and detection program to our ordinance. So I'd recommend approval of ordinance 1423.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve ordinance number 1423? A motion by Mr. Jokic, second by Mr. McSwain. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. That motion carries 9-0.
Thank you.
Item P, consider change to no firearms policy at City Hall, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. Early in October, we received an email from a citizen asking us to take a look at the policy that we've had for a while now, prohibiting firearms and weapons in City Hall. The old City Hall was also posted prior to this building being posted. And the council did take it up and they discussed this on October 21st. There were several members on the council who spoke both for and against the current policy that we have. And we agreed at that time to postpone any kind of further debate and decision until we had 2 council members present that weren't here, Mr. Witzel, who was not present during that conversation, and then Adam Fisher being seated as the new council representative from District 7. That's why we're having the conversation tonight. In the interim, I did do a little bit of research. I think I shared with the council in terms of surveys that the League of Wisconsin Municipalities had, studies, if you will, in terms of any possible tie between weapons being allowed in a building and workplace type shootings or violence. And it appeared from my review that those were not demonstrated, that there was no clear evidence, certainly, of an increase in those types of incidents in places where weapons are allowed in the structure. The other thing I've done in the interim is I did get some input from employees. I asked the people in this building what they thought, and I heard from a number of them, and it was divided, as you can probably imagine, but there was a slight preference for not allowing weapons in this building. But I got some very thoughtful responses, and they mirror some of the comments that were made here 2 weeks ago by the council in terms of the pros and cons. So I bring it to you tonight for your review and discussion and possible action.
Thank you. Discussion from the council. Mr. Bargunder.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a prepared statement. I have thought long and hard about this sign on the City Hall entry door prohibiting firearms and other weapons. I've gotten calls from citizens expressing their support and non-support for the sign. I've also talked to city committee members and staff about the current weapons policy. I've also read social media comments concerning the issue. Taking all their comments and opinions into consideration, I feel it is in our best interest not to change our weapons policy and leave the sign posted. I do support the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, but there is a time and a place for everything. Allowing weapons in our city hall building would be counterproductive to the great services we provide to the citizens of the city of Marshfield. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros.
Yes, so I wanted to just kind of inform the public and inform my fellow council members who maybe don't follow Facebook. On October 27th, the Marshfield Police Department posted a question to the citizens of Marshfield asking their opinion on that topic, in which there were 174 responses to that. That's a lot. If you don't have a Facebook account, that's a huge response from the town. It was overwhelmingly, more than 90% of the comments were in favor of removing the sign. I'm going to take a minute just to read a couple of those. One person wrote, "How stupid is it to put up to deter a would-be armed suspect from entering a building armed? Concealed carry may save your life or a loved one's. Why would you not want a person with concealed carry that have been trained and have all the proper documents from the state of Wisconsin?" A second one, and I promise I won't read all 174 comments. Undo, but in the famous words of Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. Most law-abiding gun carriers know that. I'm just going to read two more. An ill-intentioned person will not be deterred by a sign. We can only hope that there's someone else in the building with means and ability to defend against them and perhaps avoid so many of the tragedies we see on TV wherein people had no chance of protecting themselves. And finally, the last one I chose to read is hopefully the council members will take the overwhelming support here for undoing the sign. Maybe support the people that elect them. Maybe support what the people that elect them want over their own personal opinion.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I also have heard from various constituents, including the individual that spoke earlier today, and I respectfully, the responses I've gotten have been more in favor of removal of the sign than in keeping of the sign. And I want to respectfully disagree with a comment that was made during the open comment session. And the comment was made about why is there such a desire for the council members to carry guns into the meeting? And I don't think that that is the desire. I don't know of any council members that really have a burning desire to bring a concealed or even open carry weapon into the building. I think it has more to do with, as has been mentioned, whether or not it is a true deterrent of potential violence. I also looked at the Facebook comments. I tend to be a little cautious when looking at the overwhelming responses because I realize that there's a large contingent of the population that does not use social media. And so though the social media individuals did speak so strongly in favor, I'm not necessarily certain that the same percentage would necessarily be in favor of the overall population. But I do think it has to do with an individual's rights. And I think a sign on the door may be a little bit overreaching, to use a colleague's comment earlier. And I don't think it's an anticipation. It's not that we're going to put a sign on the door that says bring weapons. It's simply removing a sign that says don't. And I don't know that other than media coverage that the removal of a sign would make that much of a difference in most people's understanding or even observations as entering the building.
Thank you, Mr. Fire.
Yeah.
Can you turn your...
The largest building and the largest employer in the city of Marshfield has on their doors, no weapons allowed in this building. It happens to be the clinic and the hospital. And you've got more people walking in that building every day than you'd ever get in this building. And they don't want weapons in theirs either. So, if you work there and if you had worked there, if you carried a weapon, then you were illegally carrying a weapon in the building.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
I know Rebecca pushed the button quick to speak, but how many people at the clinic, Mike, carried and you didn't know? How many people carried them in there and you never knew it? How many facilities that we have in the city Again, how do you know if people are carrying weapons in anyway? You don't know that. So that could be happening. Do crooks obey a sign on the door? If somebody wants to do a shooting or whatever, do they say, oh, I better not do that because it's against the law? Well, so is shooting people against the law. Do you feel safe because of a sign? That makes you feel safe because there's a sign that you put on there. Don't carry, no guns or weapons allowed. I think you're in fantasy land. That's all I got to say on that. I just think it's rights of the people, as Mr. Wetzel said.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros.
Mike, you're right. The clinic does have signs like that, but that was placed by the administration, not by all of the employees, not by all the people who go there, not by the patients. That was by a select few people who run the administration. So it's certainly not representative of all the people who go there or all the people who work there.
Thank you, Mr. Jakic.
So should we put a sign up there that says, bring your guns? Why not? Well, I mean, the logic here is the sign is going to make a difference. Does it make you feel less safe coming here? I mean, Mr. Sigelmeyer said he doesn't feel safe. I guess I would like to see us have the discussion why in Marshfield, Wisconsin, anyone feels unsafe. Why does anyone feel that carrying a gun is going to make them feel better? I just don't get that mentality. I know it goes back to the Second Amendment and all that. I wanted to discuss that one too, but the Supreme Court took that one away with a strange interpretation, but so be it. We can spend all night on this over a silly sign that all of us will say the definition of concealed carry is you carry a gun and don't let anyone know you have it. And no one is going to come in here and see the sign and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that if they have harmful intent. I have no fear of walking anywhere in Marshfield. I go down to Chicago and visit my sister. I don't have anything, oh, I better get a gun because I'm going to Chicago. I just don't understand the mentality, the fear mentality that we're living under nowadays. And virtue another, well, we're going to probably be at this for another half hour over a sign that says no firearms. I'd replace it with a sign that says bring your gun. I think then we'd all be really, really safe by interpretation of that sign saying, I don't feel safe. I don't know.
Thank you, Mr. McSwain.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That first part is not the throwaway line. It was the key part of the Second Amendment. At the time that this was written, they did not have standing national armies, and they did not have professional police forces. For the wording of a well-regulated militia and security and that sort of thing, you can see in local laws that were passed, mostly in southern states, but the first one I saw was in New York. They were intended to actually have every citizen train in case of civil emergency, which in the slaveholding states, they freely admitted was a possibility of a slave uprising. In many places, slaves outnumbering the other people. They did not let the slaves have guns. They very strongly urged that they didn't require you to train. They did not have the professional police forces. They were brutally abusing some people, and they expected their enemies, who they did not let have guns, to be a problem. They also had state armies because they did not have a national army. Those state armies actually fought battles and campaigns, and people were gone for months at a time. George Washington was a militia commander. Andrew Jackson, probably the most famous, most successful. He referred to his militia as the finest army in the world. They faced strict discipline and things like that. These are much different than any Tom, Dick, or Harriet pulling down and start blasting away whenever they think that there's a need to enter into a gunfight.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros.
Sorry about that. I mean, I think, Mr. Jackett, you hit it on the head. You called it a silly sign, and that I agree with that part of what you said, 100%. It's a silly sign. It has absolutely, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to stop anybody. And just to comment on, I feel safe everywhere. 14 murders in the city of Chicago last weekend alone. One weekend, 14. And Sandy Hook, I'm sure you heard of that. It's a population of 11,428 people in that town. So these can happen anywhere. And if you're ignorant enough to say that I'm safe because the city of Marshfield only 20,000 people, then that to me is just ignorant. Crazy people live everywhere. They live everywhere. There's nowhere to predict them. And I'm kind of surprised that you said that because I thought that you told us last week that you had a dead bunny on your porch. Okay, that's the only thing I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
A former utility manager, not the current one, called me and said they never had a sign on their door at the utility like that. And he didn't think it was his personal opinion, maybe the commission's at that time, I would imagine, I don't know. But he felt that we didn't need a sign down there to prevent weapons from coming in. They didn't have any problem on it. I would just ask the chief, you sent us some statistics on some of these shootings and stuff, and could you just touch on some high points on that? I'll let you speak for yours. Okay.
Mr. Fisher.
I'll try to make this brief because I don't want to be here all night. And this is a very political issue, and I know that. But there's just a few things that are coming to my mind. And I'm going to start by saying I've never owned a gun. Honestly, I don't plan on ever probably owning a gun. And you guys can thank me because you probably don't want me shooting a gun. And I'll be honest, to me, the question is not about fear that came up. The question for me is rights. Should people have rights to carry guns in this building? And I'll be honest that over the last few weeks, I've really gone back and forth on this one because it's a question of rights and people feel different. People feel very strongly that they have a right to carry and to bring it into this building. And other people feel very strongly that they do not this building. But at the end of the day, just my personal opinion, and I'm only speaking for myself here, I go back to the letter of the law. And the way I interpret the law, it gives the right to bear arms. And I think the city has a right to put a sign on the door. I think we have a right to take it down. At the end of the day, I'm going to support taking the sign down. But I'll be honest, this was one that I went back and forth on. But at the end of the day, I think the question is not about fear. The question is about rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McSwain.
There's no guarantee of safety, but the government has a responsibility. If we have a sign up, that means that anybody that comes in here with a gun is violating the law. That in itself is a sign that if you see that, you can alert somebody. That's the purpose of the sign. To say that a psychopath is going to follow a sign or not is, I mean, that's ridiculous. Nobody can tell that. But it does establish that a person with a gun is violating the law. If we have a fear in this city, then let us provide the safety. Let us, if you want to have guards, or we want to have a metal detector, or if we even want to deputize individuals in the city government and train them to handle guns and let the police know who those people are so that there's no confusion if there should be a thing, that's fine. But that's the government doing it rather than freelancing it and just letting anybody start shooting, and who knows who's, and that's one of the biggest worries that I would have, is that the police wouldn't know who is who. So if you want us to do something more for safety, then fine, but to just allow it to be to anybody who thinks that they're qualified to make a decision on who to shoot and when to shoot and how to shoot, I can't support that.
Thank you. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. I believe the chief is up and has something to say, so I'm going to let him speak, and then I have a couple questions for him as well. So take it away, chief.
I guess to comment to what Mr. McSwain said, I appreciate the support and everything as it regards to, we do have a difficult job, and we have to decide who is armed and has good intentions and who is armed and has bad intentions. And that's all part of what we do for our training and our experience and exposure to those situations through a lot of training. I mean, I don't think we have anyone on our force right now that has ever been involved in a shooting incident with another individual. But I trust that all of them, if placed in that position, would handle it appropriately. We train continually on how to identify the individual who has bad intentions, obviously. Do bad shoots happen? Absolutely. They happen in every state. They have happened in every state throughout the nation. That being said, I trust, again, our officers and their abilities to focus on the total circumstances that they're exposed to and not just the fact that somebody is holding a gun, which means that we shoot first and ask questions later. As it related to what Mr. Butke said, I think it was brought up last week. I can't remember who brought it up, or last meeting, about the number of incidents that were active shooter incidents that were intervened with by citizens that were either armed or unarmed. And the only stats I could find on that were 2016 and 2017. There were 10 incidences where citizens confronted a shooter, actively confronted a shooter, and 8 of those incidences were safely and successfully ended by the citizen. So 8 out of 10 citizens intervened and were successful. I mean, obviously there were, I believe, I can't remember the number. I want to say 60 active shooter incidents or something like that. But there was 10 where citizens actually intervened, and 8 of those 10, the intervention was successful. 4 of those 8, the citizens intervened and were unarmed. 4 of them, they were armed in. 2 of them, the citizens held the individual at gunpoint until law enforcement arrived, and 2 of those 4, the citizens exchanged gunfire with the shooter and were able to disable the shooter. So armed citizens do help in those occasions. I believe that there's a certain amount of training and education that has to come with that in order for somebody to successfully intervene in a situation. But there's probably been countless situations as well of those 60 incidents where a citizen was armed and chose not to intervene in that situation and get involved, regardless of being armed. So each situation is obviously unique in and of itself, but I believe that's the stats that Mr. Bucky wanted me to share.
Thank you. And while you're up there, do you have any record of any instances where a sign stopped a violent act with a gun?
No.
So then the sign would create potentially a false sense of security because it's not deterring the individual with ill intent. It's simply potentially creating a utopian feeling of those that are naive to the idea of somebody coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to say if it ever did stop somebody from, I mean, I think we all know here that a sign isn't going to stop somebody who wants to enter a building and do bad things. Many places, federal, state, county buildings that don't want weapons, they put in security measures to make sure that those weapons don't come in.
Such as?
Metal detectors, armed guards, some other forms, I guess, of security. But without that, it's very difficult to police whether somebody comes into a you can't be armed with a firearm in places where alcoholic beverages are sold or you're consuming alcoholic beverages. But again, knowing that, I mean, as a misdemeanor offense, I mean, people, I would assume, still do because there's no means to police that other than an incident happening and then you investigate it after that. So there's many laws in there that are out there that are very difficult to enforce, very difficult to police until the event happens, and then that's when an arrest happens or what have you. So, but yeah, as far as a false sense of security, potentially.
And one last question, in order to conceal carry requires a permit?
Yes.
And what's required for an individual to receive a permit?
I don't have it in front of me, but I know that they had to have attended hunter safety at some point in their lifetime. Or they have to have attended a concealed carry course. But that's for concealed weapons. I mean, many places, I mean, throughout the community, you can carry open, and there's no laws to that unless there's a sign saying no weapons on premise.
Thank you.
Chief, can I just ask you, is there any incident that you're aware of where somebody that was concealed carry certified initiated the shooting? You talked before about that there have been times where they were there to curtail something. Is there ever been anything where they were the primary assailant?
I could research that. I don't know off the top of my head. I've never heard of. I've never heard that question before. I guess I'd be shocked if it hasn't happened, but I don't have any data.
Okay. Mr. Budke.
This would be a question for our city attorney, and it's about a liability question. And I'm not trying to compare the two, but I do know that when we first got detention basins in the city, there was a number of us, and I was one of them, say, hey, we better put up a fence around that or to keep the kids out. And our insurance people told us there was more liability by putting a fence up. And again, I'm not trying to compare the two, but is there more liability with a sign on the door saying no weapons allowed, and we don't enforce that? Because we can't, unless we get metal detectors or what have you.
Okay, so with that then, do any of you have a motion?
You don't have to allow this student. There's a student who would like to allow.
Also, I think I have to answer that question. So, the difference, I guess, between the situation you're talking about on basin and this decision in terms of signing, the question is signing all together. This is a policy decision, and we've talked about a number of times when it comes to liability. If you're making a legislative policy type decision like that, you have discretion to do that, and liability doesn't flow directly from that decision. So partially what I think they were talking about is that we've talked about this, and I'll use a better example, an easier one is, if this body decided to say that we're going to put a stop sign on Chestnut here where it meets up with 5th Street, we don't have one there, but you put one on Chestnut. And we said that we were going to do that, and then we don't follow through for 2 months to put it up, and then there's an accident. At that point, it's the question that we didn't timely do what we committed ourselves to do. So that's the difference between a legislative decision where we put a stop sign up. You cannot be sued for making that decision, but you could be sued for not putting the sign up or not maintaining a sign. So that's the similar type of thing. And that question was raised to me about the sign here as far as the building. And I don't envision, in terms of the decision to put the sign up, there isn't really liability because, again, it's a legislative decision. You're making a policy decision whether to do that or not.
I just have 2 questions for the council. One, it seems a lot of your discussion is centered around preventing active shooter situations, which I totally support. And so the question I have, if you do allow weapons in the council chamber, how are you going to ensure that every person with a weapon in the council chamber has the necessary training to safely use that weapon in the event of an active shooter? Because that sounds like it become just as much of an enforcement issue as not having weapons in the first place. And second, with this, because the council hall is a public building, would this decision hold precedent for other buildings, like, for example, the high school, which has similar signs on the doors, and yet the only enforcement we have is a school liaison police officer of Officer Barris and a student body of 1,200? There's not really much you can do. We don't search backpacks, we don't have metal detectors. So I'm just wondering, how would this precedent affect other areas in the community?
I'm going to take that just because it raised a legal question. You know, I think the law as it stands, and I think there's been some discussion here. And again, I have tried to stay shut mouth on this because I have my own opinions about the firearms issue. But the way the law is we have a right to carry. The chief has mentioned you can open carry. You can open carry with a rifle right down the street. There isn't a requirement of any kind if you were going to do that, meaning that you don't have to have a hunter safety permit or otherwise. So that's not something that's regulated. We've accepted by our laws of the state and also, I suppose, by the country to a certain extent because of the Second Amendment to be able to do that. As far as carrying here in the building, if you're carrying concealed, then you have to have that permit. And so the expectation would be that if somebody is carrying concealed, they're obligated to do that. And that would be regulated the same way as we regulate the carry conceal law all together. And that is that if somebody gets caught and they're in possession of a firearm, in fact, I certainly have been involved in cases of that. Where people have been charged and they, had under strange circumstances, guns on the back of motorcycles and things like that maybe you wouldn't have expected to have been a problem. But in any event, the law kind of takes care of that, whether they're able to do it. The other thing is the law also takes care of the question of whether or not somebody is making decisions that are appropriate, because self-defense is a serious consideration under the law, so that if you were involved in a situation like that and you make the wrong choice, you would find yourself possibly on the wrong side of this issue, meaning that certainly somebody could be prosecuted if they made the wrong choice, as do police officers at times. As far as the school has its own policy. They make that decision. That would stand on its own. We've had some discussion here tonight that the Utility Commission apparently didn't sign or make that decision for their building, and that would be the same. So the city would have to make its decision in terms of whether we're just talking about this building or all buildings, or what its desire is here.
Thank you. Mrs. Spiros, your motion.
I'm going to make a motion that we remove the sign.
A motion to remove the sign, a second by Mr. Butke. Any discussion? Mr. Jock.
Are you doing this only for City Hall or for all Marshfield government buildings, library and such?
The one that's in discussion is City Hall.
Just City Hall.
Yeah, in fact, just if I can add for a second, there really aren't many other city buildings, it appears at this point, owned and operated by the city of Marshfield that are signed beyond this one. I would add one more thing if I can too, that, if in fact the vote is to remove the signs and end the policy that this building be signed, it would be our intent as administration to bring forward a policy change that would allow employees to carry. Right now, there's a separate policy that prohibits that. So that would follow suit, I would assume.
Thank you. Mr. Butke.
I would just like to commend the young man for getting up and speaking. I think that's really neat. Thank you for your comments. And I think that's why we need more young people attending our council meetings, that we can hear views from you people as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jokic. Okay, your sign. Okay. All right, seeing no more discussion then, please.
Mayor, just as the Parks and Recreation Director, we do have our park building sign that do have the same sign. So this may impact it. Right now it doesn't based off the ordinance, but the community center and Wildwood Station and Oak Avenue, which are 3 buildings that we do have properly signed that say no firearms allowed. Now, I'm not sure where that leads, this discussion, because it's been quite long. I was hesitant to come up here, but this may impact those facilities, which the public is welcome and encouraged to use.
This one for right now, though, is the sign at City Hall.
Right.
All right, seeing no, Bert, did you?
I'm just going to say, and thank you. And the follow-up to this would in fact be to look at those other facilities. I know there's others that don't. We've talked about those at city staff level too. So it seems like it's kind of a mixed bag among city facilities, but that conversation is for another day.
All right, seeing no further discussion, then please vote. And that motion fails. Motion fails 5-4. Okay. All right, item Q, update on the sale of city-owned property at 305 West 3rd Street to Weinbrenner Shoe Company, presented by Josh Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. As I think most of the council is aware, the city owns the building at 305 West 3rd Street, which is the Weinbrenner Shoe Factory. The building was built in 1935 and was put on the historic register, I believe, in 2008. So it's been, it's an historic building, but it is currently an active factory with, I believe, over 100 employees, and they make shoes that go all over the world. As part of the lease that we signed back in 1999, it was a 20-year lease. And the terms were that the Weinbrenner Shoe Factory would the company would maintain the building, and they would pay a monthly lease rate for the course of the term. One of the clauses in that lease did give them an option to purchase the building prior to the end of the lease, which was December 31st, 2019, which is coming up. So they sent us a notice last year, basically an affidavit showing that they had provided. And let me back up a second. Part of the purchase price was $400,000 minus any credit that they would receive for providing maintenance and upgrades to the facility, which pertain to like roof repairs and things like that. Last year, they provided an affidavit showing that they had spent over $400,000 on roof repairs over the course of 20 years. And so basically, what essentially means is they could buy the building for $10, giving us 60-day notice and an opportunity to close on that facility. So that's what they've done. They submitted a letter to us in October with the intent to purchase. And so they're actively looking forward to moving to acquiring the building from the city. And so I'm just giving you an update on that process. There are a few things left to address with that process. One of the things that the city did is provide parking along Spruce Avenue, just west of the building. That parking is angled parking for the employees, and that cuts into part of the property. So we would want a CSM to carve out that parking, basically making that right of way for the city to own and maintain. Because of that carving out, they would have to obtain a variance from the zoning board because they would no longer be meeting setbacks. The other aspect that is required by state law is to get an historic easement over the property. Basically, it's like a covenant protecting the historic features and nature of the building. So because it's the city owns it and it's on the historic register, we have to put together an easement before it's purchased by a private entity, and we're working on that. And then the other thing is submitting an historic inventory, basically going through and cataloging and taking pictures of every kind of corner of the building, identifying features of the building that are historic, architectural features, and also photographing the exterior of the building and submitting that to state, which staff has already done. So we've done a lot of those things, but we're still working on some things. The attorney for Weinbrenner did inform me that they don't think they can quite get everything done within the 60 days, especially because a variance is needed. And so they're working on some language to be submitted to ensure that they could still move forward with the acquisition of the property, even if that 60-day window is not met. And the lease does give some leeway in there, basically saying that if the property is not transferred within 60 days, that's not a default on the lease. So essentially, I'll be coming back probably with that update as far as any extension that they're requesting from the Weinbrenner Shoe Factory. So be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Jokic.
Yeah, Josh, reviewing that parking situation wasn't clear to me. Are you saying that we would hold on to that area?
Yeah, we would be asking them to a certified survey map carving out. Basically, the parking is angled parking, off of Spruce. angles towards the building so that it encroaches into the property. So we would probably asking them to carve out the back of sidewalk along that whole strip. So we would maintain that as part of the right of way.
So therefore, there would be no parking there?
No, we would keep the parking there, but the city would own that. Right now, the city doesn't own the entire parking area because it encroaches into the property.
Oh, okay.
So we would ask them to carve out a CSM so that whole area would be part of the right of way and still maintain that parking line or the angled parking there.
So the employees would still be able to use that
Yes,
for
very much,
parking?
yep.
We're not asking to, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butke.
I think the plus to this, Josh, would be if they get it relatively cheap, the bottom line is it would go on the tax roll then, where it is not now. So that would be the plus to this whole.
Thank you, Mr. McSwain.
Yeah, the contract, I guess, is pretty clear on things, but do they have to use it as a factory? Is there any provision there, or could they just sell that to somebody?
Well, I think once they own it, other than the historic easement, we don't have any other restrictions on it. They would be able to purchase it and do with it as they will. And there's some other things that I believe we would probably do a closed session next meeting if there's some negotiation stuff. We can talk about those things at that meeting.
Steve.
I'll just expand on that. There's been a question that's been raised and discussed just briefly at staff level. The agreement says nothing at all about this, but whether or not we might want to approach them and look for a right of first refusal, they're not obligated to provide that. It's never been referenced in a legal document with them before. But just to suggest that if in fact they would choose to sell, we'd like the opportunity, the first chance to purchase it back. We may have some public purpose, we may not, but there's nothing that obligates them to even offer us that at this point.
Yeah, this has been identified in some planning documents as possible redevelopment opportunities, but obviously the contractual obligation of the lease supersedes that. So we would be held to that before we could move further on any planning.
Mr. McSwain.
You said that this could be some negotiations would go into closed session, so we wouldn't be acting on it then today?
No, this is for informational purposes to let the council know that this is moving forward as they're exercising their option to purchase the property.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions for Josh? Seeing none, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Item R, report final accounting of library and community center project presented by Dan Koenig.
Thank you. Just as we did at the completion of the remodeling for this building, we wanted to report back to the council how the library and community center project wrapped up from a budget perspective. And as I did with my last presentation, we'll start at the beginning. And in the beginning is quite a long time ago, as Lori pointed out to me, that started planning for the library expansion way back in 1996, when the library board entered into a land contract to acquire the first parcel of land just north of the current community center, kind of in for future expansion of the library. At that time, it was envisioned that there'd be an addition needed on the library at some point, and so the library board was headed in that direction. But then in 2007, things really started to take off with the Blue Sky project being dubbed as an idea to think beyond the boundaries of just a library, but what could really happen on this block. In 2008, the Common Council became more directly involved by allocating some dollars for purchasing of additional property within that block around the library. And then I think in 2010, things really became more clear as to what was the vision for that site through a design charrette where they had quite a few community members come in, looked at a lot of different scenarios and options for what could happen on that site. But that what came out of that was the vision of a new library in a new building with remodeling of the old building for a community center. And then the progression in July of 2011, the architect was hired, Zimmerman Architectural Studios. It began to develop the conceptual layouts and renderings. In 2014, Common Council passed probably the main resolution related to the project that was authorizing the fundraising and setting the budget for the project. $7 million for the library, $2 million for the community center, and that kicked off the fundraising campaign around that time. And in November of 2014, the Bolzen Company was selected as our construction manager. In September of 15, bids were awarded for construction of the library. We had to go through a couple of iterations of bidding, if you remember, to get to a number that could meet the budget. But we worked with Bozen to get those numbers in line with what was budgeted. And then construction commenced in the fall of 2015. Once that project was underway, then in October of 2015, the Board of Public Works authorized the next phase, which was the community center remodeling, where they authorized the design process related to that project and extended the contract with Bozen for construction manager services for the community center. Then September 2016, the library is done, moved in, and boy, it's hard to believe it's been over 3 years now since we've been in that new building. Then focus was on the community center. In May of 2017, those bids were awarded, and remodeling of that building started in June of 2017 and was completed in December of 2017. And so we're over 2 years, approaching 2 years now of Parks Department and the community center being in place. So in your agenda packet, then I had a summary of the costs and budgets throughout the course of the project, actually starting in 2009. I didn't go back to 1996 to that first land contract, but Lori pointed out that that was a $20,000 land purchase under land contract, paid off over 10 years, and so it was a pretty economical way to acquire that property. But in your agenda packet, then I've got the budget summary, the first box on that cost summary, and you can see over the years from 2009 through 2017 what had been budgeted for the project. And the total for those 8 years, 9 years, $9,736,000, $9,736,000 for the project. In 2017, you'll see the footnote there that there was in the adopted budget $2 million total, $1 million for debt and $1 million in donations. As we got to the bidding award, we ended up only borrowing $470,000 for that project. So even though we had $2 million approved in the budget, it was only $1,470,000 that was actually secured in the way of revenue. Jumping down to the bottom box on that page shows the expenses that were part of the project. Starting in 2009 and 10 with some property acquisition. In 11, there was demolition of some of those properties and architectural services began. 2012 and 13, architectural and fundraising services continued. 2015, library construction started, and taking us through 2018, where we closed out the community center project. One of the last things we did is add some additional parking there for the handicap stalls along the community center. So the total expenses were $9,590,000. So it came in under the budgeted amount. And it's interesting to note the construction total for the years 2015 through 2018, $9,009,000. So we were just a hair over that $9 million target. And if you look in the center box there, that summarizes the actual revenue sources between long-term debt. The city ended up borrowing just over $4.1 million for our share of the project. We did transfer some fund balance from other capital projects funds to complete the budget. And total donations to date, $5,223,000. There's still about 13,000 of outstanding pledges that I think will trickle in over the next couple of years. And then on the final page, I had an expense breakdown that shows how that $9.5 million was spent. Property acquisition was $339,000. The professional services, that's the architectural and the fundraising, $524,000. Library construction, $6,858,000. The community center renovation, $1,727,000. There are a few other miscellaneous costs, the utility connections and so forth, for $50,000. The moving and storage, about $28,000. There was some furniture that was purchased for both buildings, about $45,000, and miscellaneous, and that was primarily the parking changes that were made at the tail end. So again, the actual revenue, $9,608,000. Total expenses, $9,590,000. So about $18,000 expenses beneath the revenue. If you look at the breakdown of the city share versus the donations, City had a total of $4,372,000, or about 45.6% of the project, and the donations covered about 54.4% of the project. So that's the summary. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
Thank you. Mr. Butke.
I just want to say we did good. We have a beautiful library, functioning well. Community center is awesome. Seniors and other uses, I think, Justin, it's used a lot. You see a lot of people there, and I've heard great comments on facilities. So people involved with that, back when staff and alderpersons, good job.
Anything further? Dan, I have to tell you, these recaps that you do, they're awesome. Very, very good. I mean, it's so helpful for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item S, comments on the city's TIF district debt management. I just wanted to go through something very quickly, and I gave you all a packet to follow along with. And if you go to that packet and just go to the back page there, and you can see that this is something that Ron gave out back on the October 30th meeting. And you can see that in 2010, we started having a lot of money go from the TIDs over into the general fund. You see in 2010, it was over $357,000. And then you see the breakdown there. And in 2013, it was over $500,000, $521,000. We were told, and I agree, but before I get that, you will recall as we went through the budgets, and I did not put these in there because you have them, but we had itemized things when we had organizations outside of city government. They came to request money from us. It was all itemized. The University Commission, we expected, and they did itemize everything that they wanted from us. And then as an example, when Dean wanted certain things for the streets division, not only did he have it detailed, but he actually had it, pictures of the trucks we were going to buy, how many carburetors were in their horsepower, and all this different stuff. The amount of detail was incredible, and it's the amount of detail actually that we expected. Now, when you go to the packet of information that we received there, you will receive, I'm just going to go through this very briefly. The first one at the top, you see 2013, and there's 2 pages to this. I'm going to take you down to the very bottom of it because we were told back in February when we went through that very uncomfortable meeting that you really can't see where this money is. It's buried deep. You would really have to know what was going on. And I can understand that now, but I can also say there was something here that, in my opinion, was a little bit. Well, you can make your determination. It says the tax increment is applied to the city's principal and interest obligations on debt that were incurred as a result of the development agreements approved by the Common Council and other improvement costs. The way that reads is the expenses that we are about to see, somebody looking at those is going to assume that is for principal and interest, because that is actually what is said. Now, this one has a little bit of a disclaimer. It says, and other improvement cost. So if you turn around to the next page there in 2013, and you look at TID number 3, you see up at the top, it has transfer to debt service fund. And this is what was sent over. So you make the assumption based on what you have here in writing, that the amount being transferred to the debt service fund would be the principal and interest as is itemized here. When you go to the next page, and don't worry, we're not going to go through every year. In 2015, you'll notice that the verbiage at the top leaves out the part about the Common Council and extra developments. Now, this one is very specific. It says the tax increment is applied to the principal and interest obligations on debt incurred from development agreements. The tax increment also pays for the annual audit cost of these TIF districts. If you are reading this, which is why the council members that approved this, and everybody, including Steve, that saw this, you would make the understanding on this that the amount transferred was for principal and interest. Just as when Steve, the finance, budget, and personnel, and Public Works gets these things like from Dean where it says we need this many cars, it's there itemized. But if you look at the amount set over it, still it says down below, transfer to debt service fund. And it's got all the different TIDs there, and that the transfer to debt service fund went over there. And based on the data that we have here, what went over was more than principal and interest. And so the question is, where is that buried? Well, it's buried in somewhere that we don't know. Now, would would anybody else in the city know that? Probably not, but you know who should is the people that were doing the audit and the people that were doing PFM. They should have caught it, and they should have said, hold on a second, that's more than principal and interest. Because what this says very clearly is we are going to pay the principal and interest. And what I just want the citizens to know and the council to know, and I will say a long time ago, I asked Tom Witzel, the council president, to work with me and Steve and Ron on meeting periodically. And I met with him earlier and discussed this over the weekend with him so that the citizens can rest assured and the council can rest assured that moving forward from here, if you go to the final page, which is the 2020 this year breakdown, you see that it's very, very clear. Professional service and principal and interest. In all of them, professional services and principal and interest. So that this way going forward, we are very, very clear that the amount of money being transferred is not buried somewhere or anything else. It is very, very clear. For the last several months, this has just bothered me to no end, that you'd have to have an advanced math degree and blah, blah, blah to find it. In my opinion, when you say the amount going over is principal and interest, that for me is it's crystal clear. That's the amount that it should be, and it wasn't. So somebody should have called that out. Maybe either our auditors or PFM just should have said, hey, by the way, you're spending more than, you're putting more over there than principal and interest, and that way the council would know. But the good news is it's been found, it's been caught, it will not happen again. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. And to piggyback off that, I would like to thank Ron for all of his incredible hard work on unraveling what had been done and his efforts to make everything as transparent as possible, even to the point of making sure that all debt services related to the TIDs is very separate from all debt service that comes from the city. I also am very appreciative that we've moved to Ehlers as our auditors and that we have, I guess, broken ties with the group that should have caught this and alerted us to these strange happenings.
All right, we'll move on to item T, request to approve resolution number 2019-48, allowing an exception to section 9-46(1) of the municipal code to permit open containers at the Main Street Marshfield Holiday Wine Walk on December 7th, 2019, 11 a.m. to 3:30, presented by Rick Grams, the police chief.
Yes, thank you. I've brought similar requests to your attention. We've had 4 of these events in the last year that were all run successful, where we exempted the ordinance and we're allowing open containers in areas that we would normally not allow this. But this request is similar to those. December 7th, like the mayor had said, from 11 a.m. until 3:30 p.m. The event runs from 11 to 3, but they could be served up till 3, so that's why I extended it to the 3:30. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on this request for this ordinance exemption for this specific day and time. The only area that would be allotted is Central Avenue between Veterans Parkway and I believe 9th Street. I'd have to double check here. 8th or 9th Street, I believe. So, but yep, 9th Street. So would be happy to answer any questions or would look for your approval on this.
Thank you. There is a motion to approve resolution number 2019-48. Motion by Mr. Jockick, second by Mr. McSwain. Discussion, Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. Just, I guess, clarification. I'm a little surprised that this is strictly on Central Avenue, as some of the wine walks and other events like this in the past have included some offshoot streets, and that apparently is not the case this time around.
Yes, it's my understanding that the businesses that have chosen to participate are all on Central Avenue. for that reason. And we will have a police presence in that area as well during that time.
All right, thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, please vote. And that motion carries 8-1. Item U, adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin Statutes Chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. There's just one item tonight. The second one has now been put under renegotiation. The one we will be discussing is proposed agreements between the city and MCHS Inc. Their motion to go into closed session by Mr. Butke, second by Mr. Witzel. Seeing no discussion, please vote. And motion carries. We are in closed session. So we are back in open session. Item W, action on matters discussed. Is there a motion to approve all 5 contracts with Marshfield Clinic Health Systems, Inc.? A motion by Mr. Peschel, second by Mr. Bargender. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, please vote. And motion carries 8-0. Any suggested items for future agendas?
Mayor, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to put on a future agenda a discussion for city emails for all committee members, board members, commission members. We talked about that a little bit when we had our training, and I think it's very important due to open records requests that our committee, board, and commission members are not using their private emails. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Steve.
On behalf of Councilmember Witzel, who left before closed session because of a conflict with that item, he's asked that we put on about Airbnbs. Currently Airbnbs are, I don't think are even allowed in the city, or I shouldn't say that. It's very restricted, the opportunity to open an Airbnb. So he asked that that be put on upcoming agenda. I think ultimately it's going to go to the Plan Commission. I think that's where it would be referred to for initial discussion though, but we'll start that process rolling.
Anything else? Seeing nothing else, there's a motion to adjourn. There we go. A motion by Mr. Bargender, a second by Mr. Butke. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.